All right, Dagoth, why we're here?
Yeah, you said you had a project in mind.
Indeed. Seeing as though I've acclimatized to the use of this computer device, and seeing as though we have naught else to do in this bizarre afterlife of ours, I figured I would start a YouTube channel.
And you want us involved. Why?
Well, that would be more than sufficient for the task at hand. I believe that having a wider array of voices would be more entertaining for our viewers.
You have viewers?
Well, not yet. But it is only a matter of time until I have millions under my sway.
So, you want us around to be your backup dancers?
More like performers.
All right, what's the plan then?
Well, for this first project, I figured we could rank the Halo series in a tier list.
I'm guessing Harbinger, Tartarus, Truth, and Escharum won't be included.
Funny you mention it. Tartarus and Truth did ask if they could be involved, but we all decided that they might be biased in one way or the other. As for Harbinger and Escharum, well, they are still adjusting, if you catch my meaning.
You mean they're still wrestling with their existential crises?
Yeah, pretty much.
Wait, I thought Harbinger was from the same reality as Tim.
There's more than one person named Harbinger, Albert. And the Harbinger from my reality only shows up in this place every so often. His death isn't guaranteed, after all.
Well, isn't that perfectly confusing?
Still not as confusing as the schizophrenic train derailment that is the release order of Resident Evil.
Oh, you want to talk about confusion, Nano Dick? I don't think a quantum supercomputer could keep track of the nonsense that went down in your reality.
None of your native realities can compare to my own in complexity, gentlemen. It is a pointless argument.
That's only because half of your reality is the product of a cocaine-induced fever dream.
Precisely. In any case, I've taken the liberty of organizing a tier list for the Halo games already. All that remains is to debate the placements. Are we all game?
Sure, why not? I've been rereading and replaying the series recently anyway.
This should be entertaining at the very least.
Excellent. How about it, Wesker?
Well, as surely as this will devolve into a cringe fest, I suppose I may as well participate. I'll probably be dragged back into those insipid trials to torture and kill random idiots soon enough. Intelligent conversation is at a premium in that decrepit spider's realm, let me tell you.
So which games are we ranking today?
Every video game released under the Halo license from 2001 to 2024. This will not include Fireteam Raven, Halo 2600, Halo Recruit, nor Halo Online, however. We will not be going into any of the augmented reality games either, although we will most likely wind up mentioning them here and there.
Doesn't seem like much of a tier list. Shouldn't we throw some of the books in too?
We will be ranking 15 games here, and each one is going to be a thorough conversation. Rest assured, we have more than enough on our plate for now. We can also tackle the books and comics in a later video if we want.
Sounds good. What are we basing the placements on? Campaign, story, multiplayer?
All of the above. Every aspect of each game shall be outlined. The sixth house shall be honored this day.
Not sure how I feel about honoring a horde of brainwashed cannibal vampires with tentacles instead of faces, but fine. Let's see where this goes.
Cease your blasphemy, you try-hard bubonic swit.
Perhaps we could get started between now and the heat death of our afterlife.
Yeah! I can't wait to hear Wesky bitching endlessly about multiplayer.
And I can't wait to listen to Senator Bitchless here, pontificate about lore that nobody gives a fuck about.
Bitchless? I had Mistral wrapped around my little finger for years.
Wait, you and her had a thing going?
You know it, Timmy. Ain't no head like ideologically monomaniacal head, let me tell ya.
Revolting and irrelevant, we begin the ranking now.
I assume we're starting with Combat Evolved?
Indeed, Tim. Where it all began. Combat Evolved released on November 15th of 2001, just 2 weeks after the novel, The Fall of Reach. Originally, the game was planned to be a real-time strategy, but by the time of release, it was remade into a first-person shooter, similar to Bungie's last series, Marathon. and its release became one of the defining moments for the wider video game industry. I remember that for the next 15 years, dozens upon dozens of rival game companies attempted to make their own first-person shooters to compete with Halo, and all of them ultimately fell short. I don't know how many games were touted as a quote-unquote Halo killer, but nobody really talks about any of them, other than to do an autopsy. The Warhammer 40,000 Fire Warrior game was just one example, although a fairly well-known one. We owe much to this game, and not just in terms of the Halo series, but also for the entire game industry. This single title, after all, single-handedly saved the original Xbox as a platform, practically carrying it out of mediocrity, with nearly 7 million copies sold. I will admit that I find it difficult to argue it could be any lower than A tier. This game honors the Sixth House and the Tribe Unmourned.
This right here is the OG. The big innovation that walked so that the rest of the series could sprint. Combat Evolved single-handedly revolutionized FPS games on console. This is the reason why aim assist, as just one example, is now so prevalent everywhere else. Not to mention the ingenious enemy, AI programming. On the higher difficulties of this game, you can wind up retrying the same area a dozen times, simply because the AI is that reliably challenging. And yet, it rarely becomes frustrating, because the weapons sandbox is so refined. This is the game that proves less can definitely be more. Granted, it shows its age, but it is still just as satisfying and entertaining 20 years later. Because of the way it innovated for its time, I feel comfortable arguing for S tier.
This game is mid. C tier.
Oh, here we fucking go!
Stow the belly-aching forehead. The rest of you might be too blinded by your nostalgia goggles to see it, but this game was not perfect, even for the time.
None of us are blind, Albert, and none of us have forgotten about this game's flaws.
I'm still going to talk about them. For one, the physics engine in this game is schizophrenic. Every vehicle handles like it's a wet sponge, and if you so much as have one toe in front of a warthog as it moves even 1 mile an hour, you drop dead on the spot. The level design isn't all there either. The entire latter half of the game is literally just the first half, but backwards. The Magnum is so overpowered that you can practically get through the entire game with just it, and nothing else. The second half of this campaign also became a fucking horde shooter without any of the mechanics that make a horde shooter fun. And don't even get me started on the multiplayer, or lack thereof.
This game had a multiplayer, and to my knowledge it was quite entertaining.
But it wasn't of that high a quality. It's just that nobody realized it until recently, because until recently, all that Combat Evolved could do was LAN parties. The fact is, the weapons sandbox of this game was not at all optimized for PvP gameplay. Hop into any match of Combat Evolved matchmaking on MCC, and it will instantly devolve into a chaotic shitfest. Skilled play isn't rewarded. It's all just a big clusterfuck, if an entertaining one. If Bungie had had the foresight, a PvE mode, like Firefight, would have served this game far better.
Combat Evolved's multiplayer was still influential for its time, however flawed it was. There is a reason why pistol duels on Hang 'em High became the principal way of settling grievances with a rival.
Yeah, for like 5 minutes. I don't recall anybody going out of their way to return to Combat Evolved's multiplayer modes after Halo 2 came out. I think this game only makes C tier on the back of the things it innovated.
I think you're all forgetting one of Combat Evolved's biggest innovations, its story.
Right you are, Timmy.
That is admittedly a big plus, yes.
Indeed. For the time, the story in Combat Evolved was massively ahead of the curve. It's a rather simple and simply told story by today's standards, but especially for this era of the games industry, Combat Evolved was quite impressive, and it still holds up.
The story begins with a cold open. A human ship, the Pillar of Autumn, is on the run from hostile aliens, and in the process has discovered an anomaly, a mysterious ring world, the same diameter as Earth. It can be a bit oblique the first time around, but after reading all the books and playing the rest of the games, the opening dialogue of Combat Evolved still holds up and contains all the detail you would expect if this were the second or third installment of the series. The war that we're introduced to here is one that has been going for a while, and we're only seeing this because this is the turning point that will eventually end the conflict. We're only catching the tail end of things.
The influences on this game are apparent from the very first moment. Alien, Ringworld, Starhammer, Gundam, and more, as well as various motifs lifted from Marathon, Bungie's prior series.
Of course, we can't forget to mention Sergeant Johnson's first speech. That man always makes me feel gloriously patriotic, even if the UNSC is a softly tyrannical empire full of incompetent bureaucrats.
The introduction of the Master Chief being thawed out of cryo always gives me chills, I'll confess.
The Master Chief, as a character, became rightfully iconic because of this game. He had just enough characterization to be distinct, but only so much that the player could still inhabit his shoes. Cortana and Captain Keyes were also quite enjoyable. The only real quibble is that the Cortana letters, the viral marketing campaign for the game, presented Cortana's character in a way completely contrary to how she appears in the story. This is due to Cortana originally being planned to go mad with power and betray the Master Chief later in the plot.
Even the Covenant are given a good degree of characterization in the opening of the game, and for the first third of it, they are ruthless and determined. Almost immediately, finding and infiltrating the cryo bay in an attempt to catch the Chief while he was sleeping. They also rammed their boarding craft into the escape pods of the Autumn, which, as far as I know, is the only time it is ever mentioned that they do that. Quite devious of them.
There's one funny detail we hear once Chief makes his way to the bridge. Cortana mentions that there are a dozen battleships bearing down on the Autumn, and that she can get a maximum of 3 or 4 kills. However, she also mentions that each battle group has 3 capital ships per group, and for all we know, that could mean the Autumn was only fighting 3 CCS or CRS-class cruisers and 9 escort ships, all of which might be the Autumn's size or smaller. So, 4 kills isn't all that impressive, all things considered.
Nerd!
Shut the fuck up, tentacle boy!
The Master Chief is given his new mission by Captain Keyes. Take Cortana and abandon ship to prevent her from falling into enemy hands. This is the first mention of what will later be known as the Cold Protocol.
And once Chief's escape pod lands on the ring world, the game opens up, and the story becomes that of fighting a guerrilla campaign against the Covenant. Starting with rescuing some Marines, and then rescuing Captain Keyes from being a POW.
The design of the Truth and Reconciliation was pure gold. I should think that I might borrow some design elements of that ship for my new Canton, once I get around to building it.
There's some truly ham-fisted exposition here when Keyes is rescued. He just so happens to overhear some Covenant talking about the Halo ring, and they just so happen to speak English, or he just so happens to understand their language, and they just so happen to refer to Halo as a weapon to control the fate of the universe. And Cortana just so happens to conclude that the ring is important to the Covenant's religion.
An admittedly harebrained moment, to be sure.
Once Keyes has been exfiltrated, he sends the Chief to find the location of Halo's alleged control room. This begins with a search for the silent cartographer, and one of the most iconic missions in the series.
No real wonder that this mission was chosen as the demo before release.
Once Chief and Cortana find Halo's control room, the story takes a left turn with a midpoint plot twist.
The introduction of the Flood is rightly memorable. A genuinely chilling experience the first time through. The fact that the Covenant was equally terrified of it was rather alarming. Science fiction space zombies were not nailed this hard in presentation, again until the release of Dead Space.
This then leads to the introduction of 343 Guilty Spark and the library. The Master Chief is led on a quest to secure something called the Index, which he's told will activate Halo's defense systems to control the Flood outbreak. And it's needed because the rest of the game is infested with Flood combat forms. Crazy how the little shits went from being locked up to having a population in the hundreds in barely a day. Your reality would have been giga-fucked if Umbrella got its hands on this shit, Wesker.
I'm fairly certain they would find some way to fail, regardless. Also, I didn't mention it earlier, but I think the library is actually a completely fine mission, contrary to much of the hullabaloo about it.
I partially agree, if only because the combat loop is simply that good on its own.
Those rocket-wielding combat forms are an affront to the Sixth House, however.
Get good, noob.
How can I improve when I am already a god? What a grand and intoxicating innocence.
Give it a rest, Dagoth. Moving on, Guilty Spark teleports the Chief to Halo's control room to activate the ring. And this is where the third act begins, with Cortana finally revealing that the ring is a super weapon designed to annihilate all sentient life in the galaxy as a last-ditch measure against the Flood. Spark admits that this is true, and seems to have a bit of a Biden moment, as he refers to Chief as though they had met a long time ago. Spark betrays Chief and Six, the Halo Ring's automated sentinels, on him in an effort to take back the Index from Cortana.
The next order of business is to delay Halo's activation, find Captain Keyes, and get the hell out of Dodge.
Unfortunately, we discovered too late that the captain was infected by the Flood. Left with little choice, the Master Chief seizes the Cerveza Cristal from the captain's skull, so as to use it in a last-ditch effort to destroy Halo, namely, by overloading the Pillar of Autumn's engines.
The last mission of the game is infiltrating a Flood and Covenant-infested wreckage of the Autumn and hot-wiring the ship to explode, taking the ring with it.
The story ends with Chief and Cortana drifting through space in a longsword fighter craft, the ring and everything on it destroyed.
Peek!
With all that considered, where do we land? I am at A tier.
S tier, A tier at minimum.
B tier would be acceptable, but A tier seems more fitting.
The game is still mid, C tier, B tier at best.
Wesker!
What?
You're forgetting about the goated soundtrack and art design.
Ah shit, you're right. Fine, A tier works.
Good. Is there anything else worth mentioning?
Well, there is the matter of Combat Evolved's development. The entire project was on the verge of cancellation because Bungie was pitching a fit over the Fall of Reach novel being written as a tie-in for the game, and about interference from Microsoft in general. This resulted in a deal having to be made, where a vast majority of the in-game dialogue had to be written by just 3 people, and caused a load of miscommunications. Hence much of the dialogue being dubious, in retrospect.
This cave is not a natural formation.
Precisely. Bungie even pulled a bit of sabotage, which made Microsoft keycards unable to get a person access into their game development studio. It all worked just fine, in the end though, so it's only a background issue.
I am personally split on this. On the one hand, I know for a fact that I definitely hate being told how to do my job by talentless talking heads and bureaucrats. But on the other, you can't do great art or accomplish great things without sacrifices, and without using the talents of everyone around you to their best effect. Without the pushing from Microsoft, I don't think the games, or the series as a whole, would have been quite as successful as it could be. Sometimes you have to make compromises, and I think that Halo succeeded as a brand, in spite of Bungie's stubbornness, rather than because of it.
I'm inclined to agree.
I don't really give a shit.
Very well. All things considered, I believe that an A-tier ranking is most appropriate.
Jesus fucking Christ, we're only just beginning Halo 2.
You got somewhere important to be, Agent Smith?
No, it's just that I've realized how long this is going to take.
Well, we can hopefully go through the rest of them a bit more quickly, now that we've done Combat Evolved. Next is Halo 2, which released in 2004. It became a hit overnight, selling 8 million copies in a matter of months, and consequently became one of the best-selling pieces of media ever. Its popularity was only exceeded by Gears of War 2 years later, and by Halo 3 and Grand Theft Auto 4 soon after. Halo 2 even broke news headlines on release, for the sheer amount of people willing to purchase it at midnight.
This shit made the initial sales of No Man's Sky look like a fucking Kansas high school reunion next to Mardi Gras.
The graphics, of course, were a big improvement after Combat Evolved, with the soundtrack getting a full reprise to great effect. They even got Breaking Benjamin in on it.
The weapons sandbox and gameplay loop were improved in some ways and downgraded in others. They did away with the assault rifle and nerfed the pistol into the dirt, replacing both of their roles with the battle rifle and SMG.
Apparently, that came as a result of some criticism of Combat Evolved. The original assault rifle and pistol were described as having their roles, in combat, reversed. In Combat Evolved, the rifle functioned like a submachine gun, and the pistol functioned like a rifle. So in Halo 2, they now had a rifle that functioned like a rifle, a pistol that functioned like a pistol, and an SMG that functioned like an SMG.
Still kind of irritating that they just cast off the iconic Magnum and AR like that.
Somewhat, yes. In any case, the gameplay loop was modified into finally embodying the essence of what would come to be known as the Golden Triangle: guns, melee, and grenades, with each aspect having an equally important role for success. The ability to dual-wield weapons and hijack vehicles was also added.
And it was fucking glorious. There's a reason why Halo 2 was the first to really have an esports presence, not to mention the creation of many custom game types that became mainstays going forward. The online multiplayer of this game was where I became the major league gamer you see before you.
Too bad all that gaming skill couldn't save you from that boulder-punching jarhead.
You shut the fuck up, Armstrong. You got no room to talk when you lost to a Ninja Gaiden Deviant Art OC.
Cope and seethe, Wesky. Cope and seethe.
The more immediate effect of the changes to Halo 2's sandbox was felt in the campaign. Halo 2 was swiftly known for being notoriously difficult on heroic and legendary settings. As little as 5 hits from an enemy plasma rifle could kill the Chief, and completing the game on legendary quickly became a mark of prestige. Even more so if you could do it under a certain time limit. All this has culminated with Moist Critical, putting up a monetary reward for anyone who could complete the Halo 2 campaign on Lasso, no glitches or skips, and without dying. It took months for someone to finally take it.
Your Dorito dust-covered ass ever set a record on a legendary speedrun, Wesker?
I did, at one point. Thank you very much. But the results couldn't be recorded because they accused me of cheating. Really, it was just a result of my superior genes and biology.
So you cheated then?
Only if it's cheating to simply be better than everyone else.
Cease your preening, tryhard. We haven't even begun to discuss the story.
The campaign picks up where Combat Evolved left off, and we follow the story of an elite being put on trial. He was in command of the Covenant fleet that had found Halo and which fought Master Chief in the first game. His failure to prevent the ring's destruction has now led to him being scapegoated as a heretic to keep the Covenant Parliament happy, and likely to keep all eyes on him rather than on the hierarchs. This is immediately contrasted by a scene of Master Chief being celebrated as a hero alongside Sergeant Johnson. Miranda Keyes, Captain Keyes' daughter, is presented with a posthumous award for her father. We then see the elite commander being publicly tortured in front of the entire Covenant Empire and branded with the mark of shame. This is all in keeping with the game expanding on everything the first game established, namely by humanizing the Covenant, and in particular, the elites.
And now you have my attention. This game single-handedly got me invested in the Halo setting and made me a die-hard fan of the Covenant.
I wouldn't expect you of all people to be a Covenant fanboy. I thought you would hate the Covenant since the whole thing is a giant pyramid scheme. orchestrated by the prophets for their own gain.
Those dickless noodle-neck pencil pushers are exactly the kind of shitlords I can't stand. The elites, though, are precisely my kind of people. You always get exactly what you deserve, and you get it by fighting for it. While the brutes have much the same thing going on and more extreme, they aren't nearly as complex or interesting. Elites aren't just about might makes right, but also about honor and loyalty and regret, and the conflict between one's culture, one's duties, and one's ambitions. I guess you could say I relate to them.
Too bad your precious elites only ever get the Worf treatment in this franchise.
Only when they're badly written, sunglasses.
I don't know what to tell you, Armstrong. It seems like it's by design to me.
To get us back on track, the story continues with the award ceremony being interrupted. A Covenant fleet has found Earth, and the UNSC begins its last stand.
Lord Admiral Hood mentions that the Covenant fleet arriving at Earth is only a 50th the size of the one that destroyed Reach. The Covenant fleet in question only has 15 ships. That would imply that Reach was destroyed by 750 ships, but we know that a maximum of 300 were actually there.
The defense grid of Earth begins to mount a counterattack as the Covenant close in, and the Master Chief is ordered to defend Cairo Station.
And like clockwork, the glorious and inspirational Sergeant Johnson begins his illustrious career as the fan base's most beloved character. Too bad Paramount decided to pretend he doesn't exist, just so that they could make Captain Keyes black.
Stop right there, Armstrong. We will not sully this video with mentions of that abomination. We can discuss that particular train wreck another time.
Yeah, fair enough.
It doesn't take long for the Covenant fleet, small as it is, to blow right past the Earth's defense grid, which is demonstrative. We're told that each defense platform could put a MAC round through a so-called capital ship, and there were 300 of those platforms around Earth. And still, a tiny fleet of 15 ships, which we later learn wasn't prepared for a fight or any stiff resistance, still plowed right through Earth's defenses, albeit taking heavy losses.
The Master Chief proceeds to give the Covenant back their bomb, which is the most ridiculous thing I have ever seen, and I cannot help but love it.
No fucking kidding, Dagoth. I don't think I could have done that shit in my prime, even if I had my own suit of Mjolnir. Still, though, I find it real fucking suspicious that nothing more than a pair of longswords could have enough firepower to blast a hole in a CAS-class assault carrier's hull, and in just the right spot to allow the Chief to fly into its pinch fusion reactor chamber. Even if you assume that those longswords were carrying octanitrocubane warheads, it's questionable that that would be enough to blast through that ship's hull, whereas the orbital defense platforms couldn't. Would have made more sense if a UNSC carrier or destroyer just used its MAC gun to punch a small hole through.
I suppose we'll have to assume that the Day of Jubilation wasn't built to spec, which is stupid in itself, but it's the best option, other than assuming the cutscene we're shown isn't truly representative of what happened.
Bungie always focused on rule of cool rather than consistency in their cutscenes. Which is fine by me, because I'm not a neurotic bitch like Armstrong here.
Fuck off!
As Chief fights his way through Old and New Mombasa, we learn that the Prophet of Regret is leading the invasion of Earth. After Chief disables a Scarab tank, the remaining CAS-class assault carrier, Solemn Penance, initiates a slipspace jump in atmosphere, right above the city, causing widespread chaos. The Chief catches a ride on the Inamberclad, as Miranda Keyes chooses to take the initiative and follow Regret to wherever he is running.
Miranda Keyes, from the first time we meet her, is characterized rather simply. For a side character, she's enjoyable enough, competent and daring like her father, and that gives me a sense of déjà vu for some reason.
We cut away from the fight on Earth to follow the elite commander from earlier being dragged through a prison complex to speak to two of the prophets who sentenced him. We learn about the title of Arbiter, and our elite friend here is about to be scapegoated once again. The prophets of truth and mercy know that he wasn't really guilty of the crime, but allowed the whitewash to go on to avoid pissing people off. But he's still too useful just to get rid of. So they propose that he take the title of Arbiter so that he can keep doing their bidding while his death is guaranteed, satisfying all parties. The elite commander takes the deal, as it's the only way to regain the honor that was stripped from him.
We then play as this new Arbiter, as he gets sicked on some so-called heretics in a gas mine on the gas giant that the Halo ring orbited from the first game. Because the Prophets don't like it when you post cringe on their Discord server. The missions playing as the Arbiter are a speedrunner's dream, since instead of a flashlight, the Arbiter gets to be invisible for short periods. We even get to fly in a Banshee for a while.
During these missions, we discover a remnant of the Flood from the first game. The Arbiter eventually finds the Heretics' leader, and surprise, surprise, 343, absolutely unacceptable guilty Spark, is still alive, and has been telling the Heretic the truth about Halo. However, instead of simply allowing Spark to tell the Arbiter the truth, the Heretic leader decides to choose the fuck it we ball option. The boss fight here, surprisingly, is one of the better ones of this game. The Heretic promptly loses, and guilty Spark is then captured by the Covenant.
We pick back up with Chief on the in-amber clad as it follows the solemn penance. Right to another Halo ring, about which Sergeant Johnson is none too pleased. Miranda gives the command for the in-amber clad to go stealth mode among the debris brought through the slip space portal, and for the ship's crew to start a search for this ring's library and activation index. Chief is sent down to the ring's surface to look for clues and to find out what the Covenant is doing there.
During these missions, we learn that the Prophet of Regret stumbled on humanity's homeworld by accident and jumped the gun on his exploration expedition. Truth and Mercy apparently left him out to dry. The Covenant intend to activate the Halo ring so as to begin the great journey and supposedly ascend to godhood. And so the Master Chief is ordered to take Regret down in order to interrupt whatever preparations he might be making. Chief does this in the most hilarious boss fight in the entire series, only to come outside and find that the Covenant's mobile city-high charity and the largest Covenant fleet anybody's ever seen have arrived above the Halo ring. The solemn penance begins to glass the area where Chief took out Regret, and so he has to run, only to be, quote-unquote, saved by a mysterious creature.
We cut back to the Arbiter on high charity. Apparently, the death of the Prophet of Regret has caused a political shitstorm. The Prophets are firing all of the elites from their jobs as honor guards and replacing them with brutes. This doesn't seem like a big deal at first, but it's now known to be a result of the Prophets wanting to stack their bodyguards with loyal yes-men.
The Arbiter is then sent on another mission to find the index of this new Halo ring, so that the great journey might begin. This takes us into a quarantine exclusion zone around the ring's library, as it's revealed that the ring has been containing a flood outbreak for who knows how long. The Arbiter fights his way through the infestation, managing to regain the respect of his fellow elites.
The Arbiter finds the library and the index, but Johnson and Miranda got there first. It's not talked about much in the game, but Miranda apparently sent the in-amber-clad straight into the quarantine zone to make certain that they could get to the index in time. But this resulted in the entire crew of the ship being infected by the Flood, explaining why the Arbiter fights human combat forms with human weapons. After Johnson and Miranda get mid-diffed, the Arbiter is just about to get the index when he's betrayed by Tartarus, a henchman of the Prophets, who has been a subtle antagonist of the Arbiter for the whole game. Tartarus reveals that he was ordered to take the index for himself by the Prophets, and he promptly sends the Arbiter falling down a pit. The Great Schism has begun.
What follows is one of the most memorable sequences of the series. The introduction of the Grave Mind, the closest thing that Halo has to a genuine Satan figure. It saves the Chief and the Arbiter's lives, and proceeds to sit the both of them down for a chat. It explains that the activation of the Halo ring brings no salvation, and that the Chief and the Arbiter could still halt it from happening. The Arbiter isn't responsive to this at first, but the Grave Mind basically tells him to stop yapping and uses the Halo ring's teleportation network to send the both of them on their way. Master Chief gets sent to the heart of High Charity, while the Arbiter gets sent to Halo's control room.
The next few missions introduce a new enemy type: brutes. You have to kill these fuckers as quickly as possible, and preferably in quick succession, because if there's one man standing, he will go berserk and proceed to clap your cheeks expeditiously. A pair of dual needlers is your best friend for the rest of the game.
The Chief fights his way through High Charity, chasing down the Prophets as they have the Index. Around him, the entire Covenant tears itself apart at the seams, and a race war between the brutes and elites has started. I know a thing or two about race wars, let me tell you, and what we are witness to as we fight through the city is quite surreal. Made even more surreal when the Amber-clad miraculously slip-space jumps inside the city, utterly infested with the Flood. 7 out of 10, all things considered. Could have used more enslavement.
As Chief makes his way, you can hear Truth over the broadcast yapping about some "don't worry about it, everything's fine" type shit. He basically calls for all of the elites in the Covenant Empire to be replaced by the brutes and killed. The Covenant Civil War has come into full swing.
Just as the Chief is about to catch up to the Prophets, they hand off the Index to Tartarus and have him take Johnson and Miranda on a pair of Phantoms down to the Halo ring. The Prophet of Mercy gets jumped by a Flood infection form, and Truth, surprising nobody and everybody at the same time, leaves Mercy to die. He then takes his leave and boards the Forerunner key ship at the center of the city.
We cut to Arbiter, having just exited teleportation. He finds himself near what will be revealed to be the Halo's control room. As he ventures forth, he finds the mutilated corpses of many elites, including counselors and honor guardsmen, and he encounters the brutes that did it. He then meets up with other elites, alongside hunters, who aid him in the fight and reveal to him the extent of the Great Schism. This mission ends with the Arbiter meeting the Half-Jaw, just as Tartarus arrives at the control room. The two of them then settle on a plan to break in.
We cut back to the Master Chief, as he finds himself at a crossroads. His task was to seize the Index, but as Mercy says with his last words, Truth is about to take the Forerunner key ship to Earth to finish the war. Cortana argues that Chief must board the key ship to stop Truth, and says that she will stay behind on High Charity to overload the Amber-clad's engines in case the Halo ring is about to activate. Which doesn't make the most amount of sense, since overloading the Pillar of Autumn's engines only worked because the Autumn was literally on the first ring. But whatever. The Master Chief is forced to leave his friend behind, and he promises to come back for her. I cannot help but be reminded of the day that I was betrayed by my closest friends for the crime of doing my duty, and this scene always begets some sniffles.
Pussy!
Fuck off, Albert.
Chief fights his way to well, it's difficult to say what it is. It's some sort of boarding mechanism, but it's literally just a beam of light and gravity that shoots directly into the Forerunner key ship from the very edge of High Charity's city. Nevertheless, he makes his way there, leaving Cortana behind. To be frank, I really could have used that piece of advice to not make a promise I can't keep back when I was alive. Half my problems and failures back then were a result of my word not being worth a damn, and I never learned that lesson until it was too late to turn back.
Couldn't be me. I only ever lied to the brainwashed masses of voters, and they expect to be lied to.
Did you notice that nobody asked Armstrong?
Nobody asked you either, Jack.
Don't let this distract you all from the fact that Armstrong's given name is Stephen, by the way.
Anyway, we then return to the Arbiter. He fights his way through some sort of Forerunner containment facility and frees some fellow elites from their apparent imprisonment at brute hands. It is unclear why they bothered to take any of them alive, since the Great Schism was effectively a declaration of racial, civil war, the only end goal of which was genocide.
Maybe they were kept alive just so that they could be made to witness the beginning of the great journey, knowing that they had failed to do it themselves, or for the sake of being tortured for the brute's entertainment.
It sounds like you have experience with that.
A little.
The Arbiter fights his way toward a particular holding facility, where a scarab is currently docked. On the way to it, he inadvertently allows Sergeant Johnson to escape custody, and the two strike on an alliance to stop Tartarus from activating the ring.
Johnson is based for that, but what's also based is the deleted cutscene of the Arbiter fighting the brutes on the landing pad. Go look it up if y'all haven't seen it. Would have been fantastic to see in the game, but Bungie cut it because they wanted yet another combat encounter instead, for some reason.
The final stretch of the final mission begins, first with escorting the Scarab in a Banshee, and then with confronting Tartarus in the control room. Tartarus is trying to force Miranda to use the Index, and for some reason, couldn't do it for however many minutes that the Arbiter and Johnson were fighting their way to the building. I guess he and his pack must have been conducting a lengthy prayer ritual or something.
The Arbiter finally asks the question he's been afraid to ask the whole game. He asks 343 Guilty Spark what happened to the Forerunners and what the purpose of the Halo rings is. Tartarus is forced to listen.
Don't shake the light bulb.
And it seems that he might be convinced. For about 2 seconds. But the indoctrination Tartarus had dedicated his life to was simply preferable to the truth. Something that I'm painfully familiar with, unfortunately. The final boss fight of the game begins.
This boss fight is okay, right? I mean, it's not amazing, but it works.
Agreed. And if you can fly a Banshee into the building, you can use it to kill Tartarus, funnily enough.
Wait, really? Shit, I might have to try that next time.
After Tartarus is dead, Miranda pulls some Mirror's Edge type shit and manages to snatch the Index out of the control panel before the activation sequence could finalize. It is revealed that although the firing sequence was stopped, its improper halting has caused the entire Halo array to go into standby mode. And the place where one could restart the firing sequence or end it completely is the Ark. The final cutscene ends with the Forerunner keyship arriving at Earth, and the Master Chief informing Lord Hood that he's here to finish the fight. We witness the Gravemind begin to interrogate Cortana, and then people were left on that cliffhanger for 3 years.
It is honestly understandable that people were rather miffed about that at the time.
Oh, they were pissed about a few things.
Indeed. While the storytelling of Halo 2 is endlessly praised, today, and in retrospective, is of higher quality than almost everything else in the Halo series, people at the time were mixed. Critics loved it, and it received glowing reviews, but the fanbase's undercurrent was deeply irritated that they were made to play as an entirely different character than the Chief, that the final mission wasn't the Chief's, and that the story ended more or less in the same place as when it started. The Covenant had arrived at Earth and it needed to be saved. Again.
Halo 2's marketing was also harangued at the time. While the I Love Bees ARG was a hit, as usual, Halo 2's marketing gave the impression that it would take place on Earth a lot more than it did. The tagline for the game was, "Earth will never be the same." And yet, Halo 3 wound up having more content and missions take place on Earth than Halo 2 did.
Not to mention that Halo 2 also had a very misleading E3 trailer, showcasing content that never made it into the game. The game also had a famously troubled development. Less than a third of what was planned for the game wound up being in the final product. And the developers did what they did in conditions of severe crunch. This is the source of the famous quote from a Bungie dev about flaming ninjas and whatnot.
It's still impressive in a roundabout way that despite all the issues it had, it still managed to tell one of the best narratives in the whole series.
I don't think it's much of a question how it should be ranked. All together, gentlemen.
S tier.
Good shit, lads. On to Halo 3.
There's no way we're not gonna talk about the monstrously effective marketing campaign for this game. The Believe trailer, the Landfall trailer, the E3 trailer. Fan-fucking-tastic. You could criticize Bungie and Microsoft for a lot of things, but one thing they absolutely nailed was presentation and generating hype. That shit consistently gets chills running down your back every time you see it, and it's no wonder that Halo 3 outsold Halo 2 by a lot.
A slight understatement, all things considered, but not inaccurate.
Halo 3, of course, had a significant graphical improvement over Halo 2, to the point that it still holds up today, with only a few slight inadequacies in textures and animation. The soundtrack was also remade from all the old songs, as well as some newer and genuinely iconic additions. This, combined with the marketing and all of the hype since the last game's cliffhanger, combines together into a product that consumes the viewer with a feeling of finality. No matter how many times you experience it, it feels like the end to a long, long journey. Even those who never played Combat Evolved in Halo 2 can pick up Halo 3 and come away from it teary-eyed.
The gameplay, this time around, takes all of the best things from the last two games and brings them to the next level. The rougher edges of Halo 2's sandbox were smoothed out, and the weapons sandbox is arguably still one of the best to this day. This comes with the addition of deployable equipment, new grenade types, and incredibly, the debut of Forge. Bungie seriously must have had a Nirvana-level brain blast with that one, because it led to endless amounts of creativity on the part of the community. Not to mention Griffball.
The multiplayer of Halo 3 rightly remains one of the most nostalgic times in video game history, despite a few issues.
Like the entire weapons sandbox being completely projectile-based rather than hit scan. Because reasons, I guess. This leads to the problem that literally any amount of lag or latency, no matter how small, will completely fuck up a match in online multiplayer.
Thankfully, such problems were ultimately minor. Other than it being nearly impossible to proc a headshot on an elite player model from behind.
In hindsight, it seems rather strange that there wasn't more widespread or noticeable uproar over such balancing issues. It's almost as though everyone was enjoying the game far too much throughout its lifespan to get particularly angry about it.
While Halo 3's multiplayer was never quite as refined as Halo 2's, with lingering issues here and there, it remains one of the best in the series. While Halo 2's matchmaking can't be beaten, Halo 3's has always retained a special place in the heart of many.
On that much, we are agreed. Especially since Halo 3 was the first in the series to allow player model customization, with unlockable armor sets that were gated behind specific achievements, including the legendary Vidmaster challenges and the coveted Recon helmet. I remember losing my goddamn mind trying to complete those damn things with the other members of Desperado.
That sounds like it would be the most entertaining and frustrating experience you could possibly have.
You're not wrong. On the plus side, Mistral and I had a lot of angry sex in those few months.
Cease and desist recounting your sexual misadventures, damn you.
Maybe we could get back to talking about the game instead of Armstrong's imaginary booty calls.
Well, when it comes to the story, I think we can cover it more abstractly than the last two, since it's overall a lot more simple and a lot more like a story from mythology than anything else.
In that case, we can probably tackle all the problems first. For one, the fanbase's incessant bitching about Halo 2, and the Arbiter made Bungie chicken the fuck out. So the Arbiter stopped being playable in the campaign, and had no missions of his own. Of all the things to backpedal on, this might have been the worst. One of the most interesting characters in video games, and on paper certainly more compelling than the Master Chief, gets sidelined in the game where the resolution of his entire character arc takes place. Tragic.
I don't know about that one, Forehead. I don't know anybody who was screaming from the rooftops about it on release. And besides, the Arbiter is still playable in co-op.
It's a big enough issue that people still bring it up. And it doesn't change the fact that Arbiter didn't get enough focus in this campaign.
For another thing, there are multiple places in the story where random events go completely unexplained, or where you have to listen in on NPC dialogue mid-mission to get hints at what the fuck's going on. Why was Chief having visions of Cortana saying freaky shit, and why were those visions fucking with his vital signs? Why did that flood-infested cruiser go to Earth, and why did it have Cortana's message stored on it? How did High Charity show up at the Ark when it was under quarantine at Delta Halo and had lost its primary power source? Why did High Charity crash onto the Ark's surface immediately after arriving there? Why was Master Chief's first idea to light the ring the second that Installation 08 was produced? Why did the Ark spit out Installation 08 when it did, if the ring wasn't completed and wouldn't be able to function yet? What was Cortana's so-called plan to defeat the Flood without firing the Halo array? Because it's never brought up after her message got through to Earth. And Chief's plan that he came up with on the spot is what saves the day and stops the Flood. How would Cortana have known that her plan would be found at the Ark? How was the Gravemind deploying Floodspore drop pods on the newest Halo ring when High Charity had already crashed, and he presumably had no other ship-based assets? All of these details go completely without explanation in the campaign, and had to have supplemental stories and sources shore up the gaps.
And in addition to that, the Prophet of Truth's character is changed. The voice actor of Truth in Halo 2 simply chose not to reprise his role, and so someone else had to step in. But that doesn't account for Truth's entire personality and demeanor, pulling a 180.
For real, Dagoth! They made it look like he somehow lost about 95 IQ points between Halo 2 and 3. Bro was pulling some Zinchian, Dio Brando, Machiavelli-type shit to remove all his rivals and seize power. But then the moment he gets the power, he becomes a Saturday morning cartoon villain who probably couldn't win at checkers against Joe Biden.
I wouldn't mind asking Truth what the hell was going on if he could pop in for a chat.
Unlikely for the moment, but I'll see about arranging a dialogue.
In any case, the campaign of Halo 3 certainly isn't the most airtight, and a few aspects of it do ghast one's flabbers. However, it is still an incredibly entertaining and satisfying end to a trilogy.
Of that, there is no doubt. No better game than this to hop on with the boys and get hyped up for an all-nighter. It is simply a shame that the writing wasn't quite at the same level as last time.
Yeah! There's a lot of moments of catharsis and amazement to be found. The story opens with the Chief falling from Earth's orbit as the Forerunner Dreadnought lands in Africa. Chief links up with the UNSC plus Arbiter to rally the troops and make a Hail Mary attempt at taking down Truth's ship, even as it has excavated a gigantic Forerunner structure buried in the sands of Africa.
The UNSC's attempted assault on the Dreadnought fails, however, as Truth creates a portal to the Ark and escapes. That aforementioned flood-infested cruiser lands on Earth, and while everyone mobilizes to contain the infestation with help from the newly arrived Shadow of Intent, Chief finds a device with a message from Cortana inside it. The message says that the way to stop Truth and the Flood is at the Ark, and through the portal. So Chief, Miranda Keyes, the Forward Unto Dawn, and a small portion of the Fleet of Retribution all set off on their crusade to finish the fight.
They go to the Ark, destroy Truth's fleet, and hunt him down, just as the Gravemind pilots High Charity to the Ark to crash the party. Nevertheless, our heroes stop the Halo array from firing, and Arbiter finally gets to smoke on that Truth pack, if only at the cost of Miranda's life. High Charity, for some reason, crashed onto the Ark's surface, so Chief fulfills his promise and rescues Cortana from its fetid depths. Chief, Cortana, Arbiter, and Sergeant Johnson all then converge on the newest Halo Ring's control room to trigger a local pulse to hopefully kill off the flood.
Guilty Spark then chooses that moment to disappoint literally everyone and mortally injure Johnson because he overreacts about the newest Halo Ring being destroyed by a premature firing. Spark proceeds to give 343 haters some of the only solid ammunition they have, fights the Chief, and seemingly dies. Johnson gives some final words to Chief as Cortana triggers the Halo to fire, and it's time to get the hell out of Dodge.
Chief, Arbiter, and Cortana escape the Halo Ring and the Ark through an impromptu slipspace portal. But the Forward Unto Dawn gets cut in half due to the portal collapsing mid-transition. The half of the ship that Arbiter was on sailed back to Earth, while the half that Chief and Cortana were in is adrift in God knows where. The Arbiter attends a ceremony for the fallen with Lord Hood, and then heads home with Halfjaw.
That part always does get me sniffling.
I'm kind of only just thinking about it now, but does anybody else find Miranda and Johnson's deaths completely unnecessary? Like, nothing in particular about the plot required them to die. Seems like Bungie just did that shit because it was the end of the trilogy and they wanted to make people cry.
It does seem slightly strange, but then again, both scenes were executed well enough that I find myself not caring.
All right. I think we've covered it fairly well. Where do we land?
B tier. The story, plot, and character writing all took a step down from Halo 2. And I always kind of preferred Halo 2's multiplayer to Halo 3's. Halo 3's multiplayer always feels kind of floaty and weird if you jump into it without warming up.
Taken skill issue, Armstrong. This game is a certified S tier, without question.
Not sure about that one, Albert. Maybe it's just because I never engaged with the matchmaking too much, but I'm thinking A tier is best.
I concur with Tim. Is A tier an acceptable placement?
Sure, I can live with that. It's certainly iconic enough to qualify.
Seeing this beautiful game lower than S tier makes my balls itch with fury, but I will deal with it. If only because we have 12 more of these fucking things to talk about.
Okay, I guess we're on to Reach next then?
You guessed wrong, my good bitch. Up next is Halo Wars.
All right.
Do we want to be spending too much time on this one? It doesn't have much bearing on the overall plot.
As far as the spin-off games go, we can skim over a lot of the finer details and get to the verdict.
No need for even that much. C tier is where this game belongs.
Okay, why?
Because this game is mid as mid gets for a real-time strategy. It was so mid that this game basically killed Ensemble Studios. They weren't even trying to make a Halo game, but when they made a working prototype of something they wanted to do, Microsoft basically forced them to turn it into a Halo product, which nobody was happy about. Bungie effectively turned into gigantic man-children by being a collective bag of dicks to Ensemble's employees every step of the way. All except for Martin O'Donnell and Ensemble's composer, Stephen Rippey. Ensemble did not want to make this game, and had no real passion for it. And it shows. Because just about nothing in the game had any critical thought put into it. Not its art design, not its cutscenes, not its gameplay, not even its story. If you seriously examine just about anything in this game, you'll find at least a few things that are brain-dead stupid. The story is about a UNSC ship hanging around Harvest after retaking it in the year 2531. Harvest is literally a lifeless rock by this point, and taking it back is nearly pointless. A symbolic victory at absolute best. So the Spirit of Fire is apparently just completely off on its own, not pitching into the actual war effort, since by this point in the timeline, the inter-colony sieges were already well underway. The Covenant, meanwhile, is on Harvest, in search of a forerunner structure, which they apparently didn't find the first time around 6 years earlier when they glassed most of the planet. Even though they have luminaries that can detect all the Forerunner artifacts on a planet from high in orbit, This leads to the Spirit of Fire going on a weird fucking goose chase and stumbling on a Forerunner shield world full of Forerunner warships. Shit happens. They fight a flood infestation for a while, and then an Arbiter gets killed by a standard, unaugmented Marine in the dumbest way possible. In the second dumbest cutscene in the whole franchise. The Spirit of Fire uses its slip space drive to make the artificial sun at the planet's core go supernova, destroying the entire shield world and the Covenant fleet. And then the Spirit of Fire is just adrift in space, doing fuck all for the rest of the war. This game's story went nowhere, did a lot of confusing, pointless shit, and then didn't get a follow-up for nearly a decade. This was the first game in the series to genuinely contradict pre-established canon. If anything deserved to be retconned, this was it.
Jesus fucking Christ, Armstrong. Tell us how you really feel, why don't you?
While this game was strange, in a lot of ways it also had some fun story elements and decent multiplayer.
The multiplayer was fun, but I can see what Armstrong means when he says that it is mid and passionless. Giving movement orders to any large number of units is like herding lobotomized sheep through a canyon full of barbed wire. The in-game graphics are almost laughable compared to RTSs of the same year, like Order of War or Dawn of War 2, or even Supreme Commander 2, which released only a year later. If Bungie had swallowed their pride and taken the opportunity to exert much more creative control, they might have created something truly special. But as it stands, Armstrong has swayed my view of it. C-tier fits.
I could have accepted a B tier, but C tier is fine, I suppose. It is a testament to the skill of Ensemble Studios that despite all of these issues, Halo Wars still had a decent following of fans. The soundtrack was also Kino.
I never played this one, so yeah, sure. C tier.
Very well then, on to ODST.
As I recall, this game was originally going to be DLC story content for Halo 3. Development was rather rushed and haphazard, resulting in the planned PvP modes being canned and replaced with Firefight, welcome as it is. This was something of a rough gem, and it kinda shows. It uses the exact same engine as Halo 3, but with a lot of the physics and damage models tweaked and made somewhat janky.
Well, this game is the first in the series to feature neither Chief nor Arbiter as main characters, and the first and only where you play as an orbital drop shock trooper. We follow a silent protagonist known as the Rookie on his first mission as part of ODST Fireteam Alpha 9. It's set during Halo 2 at the Battle of New Mombasa. A battalion of troopers are given a mission to infiltrate and take out the Solemn Penance, but just as they get underway, the Penance activates its slip space drive and bugs out, causing the entire mission to go foobar.
We then play as the Rookie, waking up from a 6-hour nap, making his way through the city at night as he pieces together everything that happened after drop, with help from the city's AI manager, the Superintendent. Rookie goes over footage of his fire team's actions while he was asleep, giving us the opportunity to play as each of them, before Rookie eventually tracks down the ONI agent who had been an attaché to Alpha 9, Veronica Dare. It's revealed that her mission was to get to the Superintendent, so as to prevent its data from falling into enemy hands. She discovered, however, that an engineer had found the Superintendent first and had taken all of the info she needed. This is the introduction of engineers to most of the fan base, organic supercomputers and creations of the Forerunners.
Alpha 9 finally reunites and exfiltrates the engineer, and all of its valuable intelligence about the Covenant, just as the plot of Halo 3 is about to start. The legendary ending features a cameo from Sergeant Johnson, interrogating the engineer for its secrets.
This campaign was rather short, and nothing about the plot was particularly earth-shaking. Combined with its only multiplayer being Firefight, I recall people being rather miffed at having paid full price for what was a third of a typical Halo experience.
At least the campaign had replayability. in that the audio logs gave extra story tidbits and had a whole Dante's Inferno kind of side story. The cast of characters was enjoyable enough for the time they were around, even if Ms. Dare was a nonsensical, belligerent clown. Bitch told nobody anything about what her supposedly important mission was. Made no attempt to link up with or contact anybody until nearly a whole night had passed. And then had the nerve to punch Buck in the face over him, abandoning the mission she never gave him any details of.
I have to assume the punch was just a result of her blatantly pent-up feelings for him.
Probably. Anyway, ODST had an absolutely goated soundtrack and marketing campaign, which I think saves it from D or F tier.
B tier. The story's enjoyable enough, and the campaign has fun enough moments to be worth revisiting now and again.
Agreed.
Ditto. B tier it is.
All right then, Dagoth. Reach time?
Reach time.
Reach time?
Reach time.
This game was Bungie's swan song, its final gift to the fanbase that had supported it so faithfully. This game was like a greatest hits compilation of everything they had built. Bungie wanted this to be its final entry in the franchise, before it moved on to other projects, and it certainly feels that way. Featuring a revamped soundtrack, grittier and evolved art style and design, as well as greatly improved cinematography and animation. The marketing campaign and trailers also breathed a sense of nostalgia and longing for a place that the fanbase had never seen, but had heard plenty about.
Remember Reach.
This game is in the top 3 as far as I'm concerned. The gameplay was some of the most polished of all of Bungie's projects, with a sprinkling of innovation and experimentation that feels perfect. All the matchmaking of the previous games, combined with Forge and Firefight 2, for what's basically a Bungie greatest hits album. Reach just feels special.
The story is a prequel to Combat Evolved and features the eponymous planet Reach as its main focus. Although we follow a group of Spartans, Noble Team, throughout, they are only the vehicles for the story, and the game is written that way. Everyone knows the way this story ends, and it's a bittersweet send-off.
We play as Noble 6, Spartan B312, who for the first time in the series can be customized to the player's liking. Bungie went out of its way to label 6 as a hyper-lethal vector, and give that label to Master Chief as well, simply to make the fanbase accept 6 as Chief's equal, which I suppose was a precaution born from the initial reaction to the Arbiter and ODST. Because Halo fans are the worst kind of fans, and Halo fans are the reason Halo fans can't have nice things.
Bars! Noble 6 has been reassigned to Noble Team after doing a lot of shady, Oni, Black Ops wet work. Noble Team, with the exception of George, are all Spartan 3s. And none of them are all that happy to have 6 replace the Spartan they recently lost, Tom A293. We follow Noble 6 as they integrate with their new fire team, and soon discover a Covenant incursion on Reach. And it's clear from the get-go that the planet is pretty much as good as dead, despite being the most fortified world the UNSC has.
Noble 6 is a very simple character. They're even more of a blank slate self-insert bait than Chief ever was, and to a degree, it's no wonder that a large proportion of the fanbase grew severely over-attached to them. As is normal for a customizable character, I suppose.
As the campaign proceeds, Noble Team fights all over a continent against the Covenant forces that have infiltrated the world's defenses. They defend an Oni research facility from being compromised, find the Covenant's primary staging ground, and assault it, exposing the CSO-class supercarrier that is the focal point of the enemy force. They hatch a plan to take it down with an ingenious use of a slip-space drive as a makeshift explosive in the hope that by destroying it, the planet would be saved. George, one of the team, sacrifices himself to do so, believing that he had saved his home, only for a far larger Covenant armada to appear minutes afterward, sealing Reach's fate.
Noble Team is sent to evacuate civilians from the city, New Alexandria, only to have to take cover in a bunker as their temporary field base is glassed by a cruiser. Another team member, Kat, is assassinated Kennedy-style mere meters from the bunker doors. Her death is always impactful, despite being played off as anticlimactic.
The remainder of Noble Team is reassigned once again to return to the Onai research facility they protected earlier, ostensibly for a cover-up operation. But when they get there, their orders change. They go deep underground and find a gigantic Forerunner artifact beneath the polar ice, along with the laboratory of Catherine Halsey. They defend her from an enemy siege while she makes her final preparations, and she finally gives them what they came down there for. Cortana has taken the vital intelligence from the Forerunner structure and needs to be extracted and delivered to the Pillar of Autumn. Noble Six is chosen to carry her there.
Catherine Halsey is escorted to safety by June, who we never see again, leaving Noble Team with only 3 Spartans remaining. They travel by Pelican toward the dry dock of the Pillar of Autumn.
On the way there, Noble Six and Emil are forced to leave Noble Team's leader, Carter, to fend for himself and continue on their way. They're close to reaching the Autumn when a Scarab tank intercepts them. Carter, still piloting the Pelican, goes down with the ship and kamikazes the Scarab, clearing a path.
Six and Emil reach the Autumn and are forced to operate an anti-air gun to clear the skies for its final dust-off. However, just as Noble Six finally hands off Cortana to Captain Keyes, Emil gets jumped and backstabbed. Noble Six takes the gun in order to stop a Covenant cruiser from destroying the Autumn. And as the Autumn lifts off and escapes, Noble Six is left behind. Their mission accomplished.
The final mission of the campaign has only one objective: to survive. Noble Six, the so-called Lone Wolf, is left to their fate, as Reach is reduced to dust and echoes around them. It doesn't matter how long you last or how hard you fight. It doesn't matter how many Covenant you take down. Noble Six eventually falls, returning eternally to Reach, their legacy assured in humanity's survival.
Unless you're a brain-dead Redditor. In which case you'll argue until you're blue in the face that Noble Six is actually totally still alive, guys, for serious. He's just hiding in a cave somewhere. Bungie totally left it open for interpretation, guys. No, really, Noble Six is okay.
Shut the fuck up, Armstrong.
Yeah, okay. You get the point, though. People were really attached to Noble Six. Understandably so. But the fact remains, practically every in and out of universe source confirms that Noble Six died on Reach.
The campaign begins and ends with a shot of Six's broken helmet sitting on the ground. The implication is pretty clear.
Noble Team's deaths were all a crucial part of the story being told. Each had an ironic fate, born inexorably from their roles on the stage of their world. This story is a Greek tragedy in every sense. We all know how it's going to end, but every time we see it play out, we always hope for the preordained fate that awaits the characters before us to go a different direction. It was also really cool.
Who are all your favorite members of Noble?
Carter, a born leader who knows the cost of everything he does, but proceeds nevertheless toward that which he knows he must do. Kat is a close second, and not just because she has a dump truck and a killer jawline.
Emil, all the way. If the enemy is strong, show them that you are stronger. If the enemy is cruel, show them that your cruelty knows no bounds. Everything he does is because he believes it's necessary, not due to simple sadism. He puts on an act because the act is a goal in itself.
George, for me, I'd say, I relate to a man sacrificing himself for what he believes in, and to serve his home and country at any cost. In my mind, George didn't die, but simply ascended, and became the god protector of Reach, like I did for Morrowind. Or tried to, anyway.
June. Easy. Because he doesn't die and knows that he's the best at what he does.
In any case, what ranking are we going with? I'd say A tier.
S tier. I don't think I need to elaborate.
It's B tier.
You can't be fucking serious.
The dog shit, unnecessary reticle bloom and busted armor abilities drag this down for me, immeasurably, and both laid the groundwork for the worst multiplayer in the franchise later on.
Didn't you say Combat Evolved's multiplayer was imbalanced and broken? Are you actually suggesting Reach's multiplayer is worse than that?
Obviously not. But Reach's multiplayer is still kinda mid, by my tastes. Besides, your precious playable elites are only available in custom games and Invasion. Why aren't you pissed about that?
Because in Reach's case, it's actually justified! The elites in this game are like 30% larger than the Spartans, and are an easier target.
Gentlemen, please, I think A tier is more than fair.
How come?
Well, this game caused a serious uproar among the lore community. It pretty much spat on and stepped all over the seminal Halo novel, Fall of Reach, and did a shitload of damage to the continuity, to the point that there are people to this day who genuinely think that the Fall of Reach novel was completely decanonized. Bungie also fucked with the Spartan 3s, with no real regard for pre-established lore, because Bungie never gave a shit about the expanded universe. A lot of work had to be done to reconcile Reach with the rest of the franchise.
Good point, Tim.
You know what? That's a fair criticism. A tier it is.
Fine. Guess I'm outvoted on this one. Reach and Combat Evolved belong together, I suppose.
Right alongside Halo 3.
This tier list became irretrievably cringe a while ago. No point fighting over it now.
Very well, Reach falls into A tier.
Looking pretty good so far. What's next?
Well, Combat Evolved Anniversary would be next. But seeing as though we've just finished the Bungie era, I think now would be a good place to stop and take a break. This video should be plenty long already.
Fair enough. I should probably check on a few things in my manor anyway. It's been fun so far, gentlemen. I'll see you all in a bit.
May as well get a bite to eat before we get back to it. God knows I'm going to need the calories for when we tackle Halo 4.
All right then. We'll reconvene later to tackle 343's tenure. I should probably hit up Mistral for a hot minute while I can.
I would like to thank you all for watching, if indeed you still are. And be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you wish to see the rest of the Halo games reviewed and ranked. Until next time, this has been Live from the After Party. Signing out.